I'm going to briefly cover the impact of the new ban list that's effective today for White Forest in Supreme Darkness format. So, Original Sinful Spoils is the core piece of the Supreme Darkness version of White Forest, which is kind of a Snake Eyes deck, and probably the best version of White Forest that has ever existed, because Azamina LZ bridges into anything that has Sinful Spoils in the name. So it could have been Wanted, or it could have been Deception, or it could have been the original Sinful Spoils Snake Eye. And the reason that this was good, if you haven't watched my previous video on this deck before, is because all of these cards were functionally redundant together, where you could go for Wanted if you didn't have it, or you could go for Deception depending on what else you'd had. And if you drew multiple engine pieces, you could still get things that all work together, and if you got interrupted, then you could still get to the single most important piece. So this is a pretty substantial hit to White Forest, because now it means that you can't play the Snake Eyes cards at all, and it'll probably be better to just play the toy cards again, which is not ideal because you can't bridge into them with engine. You either draw them or you don't draw them. So that'll be, instead of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Snake Eyes cards, you could debatably also take out the Subversion. This is really just in here for like some ratios on the power spell stuff. And it was like part of the resource loop where you'd summon Poplar 2 or 3 times and you'd still want something else to search. So 7 or 8 cards you could take out, and then you put in like 3 box, 3 soldier, which is 6, and 1 tank, which is 7. So in terms of the raw number of cards, it's like roughly equivalent, but it's substantially worse in terms of your ceiling because you don't have the same type of resource loop with Princess in the Grave or the Zelantis OTK and the easy Masquerena plays, the temple for like backup economy. And you also don't have like a Masquerena, a Flamberge in rotation, which could be useful for pushing back a Detonator or stealing the Detonator or whatever, or like helping you float or play through Nib. So those options no longer exist. And the box version, mainly just because you cannot search the pieces and you have to draw them, is categorically worse because you can't bridge in with anything. And this was the bridge for the entire deck, but now it only bridges into the Wanted engine, which doesn't really make sense unless you're also playing the toy cards, because these don't have high quality cards to send unless you're also playing the toy cards. And the other thing is that in the Crossover Breakers format, which is basically going to be Supreme Darkness format, these cards, the Wanted engine, trade extremely poorly into Crossover Breakers stuff. So like if you have a Detonator and you use Deception, because you have to tribute for cost, so you see here you can tribute a monster from your hand or field as cost, there's the semicolon, they can just chain Detonator to that and pop that, and this engine is extremely costly to use. Like you have to Witch send something already. If the Witch is summoned and it sets the Deception, they can just pop the Witch on summon, so you have to tribute something else with a Deception, and then if they pop that with the Detonator, then you have lost 2 cards without having even resolved the Deception yet. So maybe it will still be worth playing these cards because the Azamina LZ does work well with the Azamina stuff. You don't have to play like heavy Azamina stuff because this has options for like what you can search, like things that are still useful, like some of the other trap card searches like Unleashing or whatever. But this is probably the biggest hit possible for White Forest. They wouldn't have hit any other in-engine White Forest card. So I will cover the toy box version of this soon, but that's the main update here. Jaugen was a lot more niche, so it's not super important, but it was a light spellcaster that you could have searched off of Arciella. So that's the only brief reaction that I have, because that's the only thing that's relevant for us on the list.